Would you like to be Prime Minister?
I think it's a very tough job being Prime Minister. Very tough job. I mean, obviously, if the ball came loose from the back of a scrum, which it won't,
Might.
or of course it'd be a great thing to have a crack at, but it's not going to happen.
The human bulldozer who snatched the ball from the back of the Tory scrum is a man of many contradictions. A classical scholar turned popular entertainer, a self-proclaimed liberal one-nation Tory, hand in glove with the hardline Brexiteers.
There's a spectrum of opinion about him. One is that he will be the most unsafe pair of hands ever to open a prime ministerial red box. And at the other end, people think here is a man of brilliance and flair who can suddenly, like an alchemist, turn the base metal of Brexit to something shiny and remarkable.
So who is the real Boris Johnson? What makes him tick? And what kind of fist will he make of the job he has craved since he was a boy? This is Boris Johnson, age 5, paddling his own canoe. He grew up the eldest of 4 children in the hugely competitive Johnson family.
He knows that life is a competition and he always wants to be top. Whenever anyone asked him what he wanted to be, he would answer world king. That is true.
He painted this self-portrait at the age of 12 and downgraded his ambition to becoming British Prime Minister. He was off to Eton, where he became a star of the school plays and discovered he could make people laugh. Do you think that you learnt something for later life from acting in plays at Eton, that you could actually get more laughs by looking as if you don't know your lines than actually remembering them?
Well, I certainly think that as a general tactic in life, if that's what you're driving at, it is often useful to give the slight impression that you are deliberately pretending not to know what is going on, because the reality may be that you don't know what is going on, but people won't be able to tell the difference.
This is why he's dementing for other politicians, because they're all, to an extent, playing a part assigned to them by the party. You know, you have to be loyal, you have to be a good Tory. Boris has realised quite early on that he would go further if he broke all those rules, and people would love him even more.
At Oxford, he managed to be elected President of the Union, the training ground for future Prime Ministers, by disguising his true Tory colours.
I declare the motion overwhelmingly carried, and I close the House at 12:18 a.m.
The Tory MP, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, is a passionate Brexiteer and a long-time fan of Boris Johnson.
Gosh, well, I first met him in Oxford 30-odd years ago when I was a new student at the Oxford Union. What I remember most was this extraordinary articulacy, his ability to tell a story, to capture the essence of something. It was mesmerising. For a young woman of 18, I'd never come across anything like it.
After Oxford, Johnson became a trainee journalist at The Times, where he was sacked for making up a quote. But he got a job at the Daily Telegraph.
That's my impression. But that's 18 months away and anything can happen.
He became its Brussels correspondent and immediately set about ridiculing the European Commission. From Euro manure to one-size-fits-all condoms, little escaped Johnson's eye. Though his fellow Brussels reporters felt his stories were hyped up beyond recognition, it made Boris Johnson's name.
Yeah, I like it.
Johnson came back from Brussels as a star
Stand clear of the gates. Stand clear.
and was much in demand on celebrity TV. He was made editor of The Spectator and was elected Tory MP for Henley, which intensified his ambition to make it to number 10. But the twice-married Johnson was sacked from the front bench for lying to the party leader about an adulterous affair with one of his staff. It was one of a string of love affairs that have raised what's called the character question about his fitness for the job of Prime Minister.
He is a man with human frailties, as many are, and I would always say, should our politicians all be, perfect, puritanical, immaculate lives led, perhaps, then we wouldn't be representing the society that we live in.
He has got great qualities, of that there is no doubt. They're just not the qualities that I want to see personally as Prime Minister of this country. These are not the times when we need someone who is a bit of a chancer. And Boris is a chancer, he is a chancer.
Bonjour, c'est moi, Boris Johnson, le maire de Londres. Здравствуйте, друзья. Меня зовут Boris. Have a very, very happy Chinese New Year, everybody. Kung Hei Fat Choi.
A decade ago, Johnson showed he could reach parts that other Tories couldn't when he was elected mayor of normally Labour London. And as the front man for the London Olympics, he famously got stuck on a zip wire.
It's going well, it's very, very well organised. Get me a ladder.
If any other politician anywhere in the world got stuck on a zip wire, it would be, disastrous. For Boris, it'll be an absolute triumph. There's no he defies all forms of gravity.
When David Cameron called the Brexit referendum, he desperately wanted Boris Johnson on his side in the campaign. But Johnson was now calculating whether to reverse the stance he'd taken 3 years earlier.
So how would you vote tomorrow if there was a referendum?
I'd vote to stay in the single market. I'm in favour of the single market. I want us to be able to trade freely with our European friends and partners.
I rang Boris and said, Boris, you can't do this. You cannot come out for leave. You can't. And I said, if you don't, Boris, I'll run your campaign to be leader. I have to say, I did say that to try and bribe him into not doing it. Immediately went the other way, naturally.
Right, well done, everybody. Thanks a lot. Take care. Brilliant.
Many people thought that Johnson chose to back leave to endear himself to pro-Brexit Tory members in a future leadership contest. That was the view of the senior Remain Minister Amber Rudd as she faced Johnson in the TV referendum debate.
You need to look at the numbers, although I fear the only number that Boris is interested in is the one that says number 10. But the fact is, he's the life and soul of the party, but he's not the man you want driving you home at the end of the evening.
As he left home the morning after the Leave campaign's shock victory, Johnson had become simultaneously the most hated and the most loved politician in the country. With politics plunged into convulsive and unpredictable turmoil, the new Prime Minister, Theresa May, gave Boris Johnson one of the great offices of state as Foreign Secretary, much to his astonishment.
Foreign Secretary, you could have knocked me down with a feather. I'm very surprised. Very. You're Principal Prime Secretary.
At the Foreign Office, he met the senior mandarins, and after his first full day at his new school, he emerged to face the media.
Foreign Secretary Johnson, diplomacy is about personal relationships. Today, the French Foreign Secretary has said you've told a lot of lies in the campaign. The German Foreign Secretary has said some of the stuff you've done is outrageous and irresponsible.
Well, after a vote like the referendum result on June the 23rd, it is inevitable that there's going to be a certain amount of plaster coming off the ceiling in the chancelleries of Europe. It wasn't the result that they were expecting, and clearly they're making their views known in a frank and free way. I have to say that the gentleman that you mentioned, the French Foreign Minister, in fact has sent me a charming letter just a couple of hours ago.
Can we move on? Forgive me, I'm going to...
His most contentious moment as Foreign Secretary came when he gave evidence to MPs about the fate of Nazanin Zahawi-Ratcliffe. The Anglo-Iranian woman had been jailed by the Tehran regime for being an alleged spy.
When you look at what Nazanin Zahawi-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it.
In fact, she'd gone to Iran on holiday, and Johnson had misremembered his briefing, and the Iranians used his words against Mrs. Zahawi-Ratcliffe.
I think he had a chance to prove to the world and to himself, to his friends and supporters, that he would be an outstanding, he could do a really big job at a very difficult time, which it was, and in my view, he failed. So that, again, also gives me cause for anxiety and worry. It doesn't alter the fact that he's extremely agreeable to have dinner with.
Sir Nicholas Soames is the grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. And Boris Johnson recently wrote a biography of Churchill in which he pointedly noted that Churchill was a journalist turned politician with many human flaws who was written off but called in to save his country in its darkest hour. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson is now about to become Britain's 55th Prime Minister and the 20th Old Etonian, with many people questioning his ability to handle the most daunting and difficult of jobs in the most forbidding political environment since the Second World War. Do you have any doubts about your ability to fulfil the role of Prime Minister?
I think people who don't have doubts or anxieties about their ability to do things probably have something slightly terrifyingly awry. We all have worries and insecurities, but I think we've done a pretty good job so far in City Hall, and that's what I want to continue to do.
Boris has a vision for the country, and this energy and this optimism which the British people are longing to feel because he believes in the future. He is an optimist, and an optimist is catching. It's like a smile, it's catching. You share it like a cold. You look at it and you smile too. He's not fazed by difficult. In fact, I think the harder the challenge, the more we'll get out of him as Prime Minister Boris.
My biggest single worry perhaps about Boris Johnson is that he seems to me to be a politician who has inhaled his own legend before he's created it. He's shown levels of personal and political narcissism which do worry me. And it's as if he believes in his own myth. My own feeling veers towards the anxiety end of the spectrum. I hope I'm wrong, but it certainly does veer towards the anxiety end of the spectrum, because you cannot busk being Prime Minister.
I texted him last weekend, and I said to him, when Churchill became Prime Minister, on the day he became Prime Minister, he went back to his flat where he met my grandmother and his children, and they drank a bottle of champagne. And he proposed a toast, which I quoted to Boris, of here's to not buggering it up. And I said to Boris, I can't possibly vote for you. I can't vote for you. But I pray for all our sakes you don't bugger it up. And that is my hope for Boris.
And your fear?
My fear is that he could bugger it up.